Hey, welcome to this video. Today we're going to be talking about moving from engineering over to design. And to do this, I brought over one of my friends, Eliot Chang, and he'll be talking about his story and how he moved from engineering over to design. Now, maybe you're sitting at home and you're an engineer and you're kind of sick of your IDE and you want to transition over and, mess with UI UX elements over in Figma and become a designer. Well, that's exactly what my buddy Eliot Chang did, and we'll be talking about his process during this video. So today we're talking with Eliot Chang, and he placed, to give you some background, he placed top in the nation. So it's about one out of the top, 40,000 applicants in the Adobe design competition. And he does some design work for some, startups, like consulting design work for some startups, and he also works at the startup I work at. So he's definitely pretty well versed in this career field. And he's a great person to get advice from. And before we get into the interview, if you're interested about tech careers, you're interested in tech, be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel because I have a lot of content that I'm hoping to pump out, and leave a like for the YouTube algorithm on this video. Okay, so with that, let's dive into the interview. I'm going to be going down to my laptop here, and hey, Eliot.
Hey, Andrew. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thanks for being here. We're happy to have you on the channel here. So maybe let's start off. What's like your background? Tell me a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, for sure. So my background was originally actually more technical. Originally studying economics, mathematics, and computer science. And that's because growing up, I had always wanted to enter into tech and go to Silicon Valley and work at a startup. But it was actually after my first software engineering internship where I realized software engineering kind of sucks, especially in a corporate setting where if you're doing programming for your own personal projects, it's pretty fun because there's a creative outlet through that process. But if you're programming for a corporation, usually they scope out the task for you, remove all the creativity involved, and you're sort of just a coding monkey. And I wanted to pivot away from that.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. And just for people watching at home, even if you're an software engineer, please don't dislike this video. Eliot's comments are just from his frame of reference. He doesn't mean to insult. I'm a software engineer myself, so he doesn't mean to insult our field out here. But yeah, so I mean, I think that's something that happens a lot, though, right? Like as software engineers, people burn out. It's like not a unheard of thing here. So I guess I think the creative outlet is definitely one thing. So when did this happen? What made you click and say, hey, the next internship I'm going for isn't software engineering, it's going to be design?
So even before getting my first software internship, I had worked on a couple previous projects just to build up my portfolio so I could apply for these internships in the first place. So I had worked on a lot of web apps, mobile apps, games, and consulting for other startups just on campus. And what I found was just the creative process behind design was really what I was interested in tech, of being able to think through a problem and solve it rather than thinking through the logical steps of implementing it in some sort of programming language.
Gotcha, yeah. So let's dive into maybe some similarities and differences because you're a design intern right now, right? So let's dive into some of the similarities and differences between being an engineer and being a designer. I mean, could you give us some pros and cons, a little bit compare and contrast between the two?
Yeah, for sure. I'll get started on more on just personal projects. What I found is that I actually find development more fulfilling if it's a personal project and being able to see myself build something from the ground up. And design for personal projects, it's still fulfilling, but it is a little tedious when you don't have the structure of having a team, of having a design system, of having guidance of what to even design now. And because it's so much more freeform, it feels a little overwhelming. Whereas when you're working in a company, it's almost the opposite of, because you have all of the restrictions in the problem space given to you when you're in a corporation for design, but you still have the creative wiggle room of trying to explore where in that space you want to solve. Compared to programming where it's the space that they give you is already very, very restricted. There's almost zero creative wiggle room, and you sort of just have to straightforwardly solve that problem.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. So it sounds like you're pretty happy with your choice of design over software engineering. Could you talk us through maybe the day-to-day in your current corporate environment, or a little bit about the pros and cons of your day?
Yeah, for sure. So For designers in industry, what usually happens is you have a couple tickets on what you need to design for that sprint. So there's a couple where it's maybe you need to design the nav bar, maybe you need to design a certain part of a web app. And I think here it's important to make a distinction between startup and like FANG companies when it comes to design, where at least from my experience of seeing a lot of my friends go through like the FANG design process, it's very good for building out your foundational skills, but the trade-off is you sort of end up working on a very, very specific, very scoped out task, which might be what you were trying to avoid to begin with by pivoting from software edge to design. But the trade-off is you do get to learn how to design this one very small piece of a web app to the like absolute best of what that design could be. Whereas in a startup setting, it is a little more freeform where maybe you're designing the entire web app and maybe there are some design considerations that you hadn't really considered. But at the end of the day, it's a much more freeform space to train your creative muscles with.
Gotcha. So hey, I think I think you gave a pretty good pitch, on why if you're an engineer you should transition to design. Maybe even convince myself here. So maybe again the viewers watching this video, maybe we have some engineers who really actually do want to take that step and transition and pivot from being an engineer and go into becoming a designer. So I think that this type of career change is pretty difficult to pull off depending on like where you are in your education and where you are in terms of like your life, right? So let's what's your story? How did you manage to pull this off?
Yeah, so I originally what I did was I already had a portfolio made for my software eng internship, and those were basically just some really shittily designed like mobile apps and websites. And I decided that I was just going to utilize what was already done previously and just improve the UI and the UX there and improve the case study of, hey, I have created this project already, and not only did I do the programming aspect, I also did the iterations on the design. And a lot of companies, especially startups, what they want is someone who is not only knowledgeable in design, but also in the development handoff process. So being someone from a computer science background is actually a huge advantage to you if you can pick up those, at least like the baseline skills for design. And right now it's mainly in Figma.
Gotcha. Okay. So what would your advice be to someone who's actually trying to do this, and where would they learn these skills? What would your advice be for these early designers?
Yeah, for early designers, I would say the easiest way to get a portfolio piece is just doing case studies of take an app that you use a lot, maybe like Reddit, Duolingo, whatever it is, and just try to figure out what part of the app is dissatisfying to you, at least from the design perspective, and try to figure out how you would solve that problem. And if you're advanced enough, maybe even pick up Figma and try to prototype that out. And eventually you'll get to a point where you'll be able to solve that problem, at least visually, from front to back, pretty easily once you go through that process a couple times.
Yeah, and I think if people are diving into Figma, it'll give them a really good view of what the job actually looks like. And if they don't like that, then they probably won't enjoy design. So I think that's a great way for people to get started. And I think you've had some case studies yourself that you've done, right? Do you have any tips on how to do that?
Yeah. I would say a lot of, at least entry-level designers, myself included, fall for the trap of, hey, I want to design something super novel. I want to design something super aesthetic. But at the end of the day, what matters is you design something that's functional. So for example, for my application to this previous summer's internship at Ripcord, the case study I actually showed in my interview was a case study I had done on Robinhood. And there instead of doing a UI case study, I actually did a redesign more on the UX side of, hey, the current onboarding process of Robinhood was good when it first came out, but it feels a little outdated now. So how can we improve that onboarding process to improve our user retention and user acquisition? And being able to recognize that better design can lead to better business performance, I think is something really key that if you can convey that during an interview is really powerful.
Gotcha. Yeah. So speaking of the interview, do you have any tips for that on how to leverage your past projects or how you leverage your your case studies?
Yeah, so one thing to note about the design interview process is in my opinion, it's a lot easier than the software engineering interviewing process where you it's like a crapshoot, right? Like you have to make sure that you get the right leak code problem. You need to make sure that the right person sees your resume and you get along through that process. I think with design, the first barrier to enter is much higher of getting your resume through the door, but if you get a face-to-face interview, what's nice is that it's basically just a presentation that you can prepare, where you walk them through your personal portfolio website, you pull up maybe 2 to 3 of your case studies, and you walk through them. And this is something that you can rehearse. So if you have the time, being able to reach out to people on LinkedIn, feel free to reach out to me or Andrew, and getting critiques on your portfolio piece could be a really, really good way to get that practice in before you get into an interview.
Gotcha. Yeah. I mean, I think that makes sense. So like to recap, right? Software engineering, super easy to kind of get into, like in terms of the interview, but it's super selective later on in the process, especially in the final rounds. And it sounds like design is almost kind of the opposite. Initially, super high to get your foot in the door, but once you get your foot in the door, it's kind of, not easy, but, it's significantly different than the software engineering process.
And I think that's a fair assessment. Like for me, my stress levels, if that's a good benchmark to measure it against, is my stress levels when I do design interviews is way lower than my software engineering interviews. And that's just because software engineering, when someone's proctoring you and you're live coding, it's pretty stressful and like under pressure you crumble. But if you have a well-rehearsed portfolio piece that you like have developed over the past couple of years, it's something that you're familiar with, and the anxiety of the interview largely disappears.
Yeah, I've definitely had my share of, very awkward 30, 40-minute conversations on like CoderPad and, like those code sharing websites. So I definitely get what you mean. And I think a lot of people, at least if you're watching this video, I think like you're maybe an engineer and you're trying to become a designer. So maybe this is something that you are more, I guess that you're looking forward to, right? All right, awesome. So like, it sounds like that you had a pretty great process. It was like a pretty, smooth process and pretty smooth transition from becoming an engineer to becoming a designer. Huge like emphasis on that portfolio and those case studies. If you had to do one thing differently looking back, what would you do?
Honestly, I think I put an overemphasis on trying to pick up computer science skills of, I don't need knowledge in computer systems or operating systems, or honestly a lot of the curriculum that's taught in a lot of computer science majors currently. And the caveat being, if you are someone who wants to go into industry, who doesn't want to go into academia and do like AI or machine learning research, if you want to do that, if you want to get a PhD, then getting a CS degree is definitely the move. But if you want to go into industry as a designer, I highly recommend, one, you do pick up programming skills, but don't focus on the more theoretical computer science focuses. Instead, I would say what helped me the most to stand out in the crowd was my background in behavior economics, of having something that was more in the humanities that showed that I had an interest in understanding human behavior and applying that to technology. I think that was something that helped a lot, and I wish I had focused on the humanities more during college, at least.
Yeah, I think that's a great point that you made. Do you think you would have majored in one of the humanities?
Originally, I actually wanted to major in philosophy and psychology, but I realized I probably wasn't going to make any money, so I did the sellout move and pivoted to computer science.
Gotcha. Yeah. I think that's a very fair point. I'm sure there are a ton of successful philosophy majors, but it makes a lot of sense. Yeah. So awesome, Eliot. Thanks for being here. Thanks for telling your story. I guess any last words of advice?
Yeah, I would say just if you want to pivot to design, I would definitely go for it. And I think something to consider is that right now the market for programmers is starting to get very saturated, and you can see how a lot of K through 12 programs are starting to promote, hey, pick up programming while you're on, which is definitely 100% true. But a consequence of that is suddenly there's going to be a time where the job market is going to be flooded with more programmers than it needs. We haven't hit that point yet, but eventually we will, I think. I don't know if that's true. This is an assumption. But once we do get to that point, what that means is we're going to get a higher need for designers. So picking up design skills now will be really good for your career when design really starts to take off.
You know, I was gonna say, well, maybe we'll look back at this video to see if you're right 10, 20 years from now.
It'd be unfortunate if I weren't.
Software on the software engineering career landscape, so to speak. All right, awesome. So Elliot, you know, do you have any relevant links you'd like to plug? You know, where can people find you? Anything else?
Yeah. Andrew, I'm sure you're tossing my LinkedIn or something in the description. Maybe my portfolio website, eliotc.com, so people can check out what my portfolio looks like. It's not the best, I'm going to be real with you, but it's enough, and that's the key. I think a lot of people, they always try to maximize of like, I want to have the best portfolio, otherwise I'm not going to apply. What I realize is just like, as long as you get to a certain threshold of like good enough, that's all you really need.
Hey, yeah, C's make degrees, right? So hey,
C's get degrees.
So if you found this video helpful at all, you know, please smash the like button, drop a comment. It costs nothing, really helps the channel and helps us with the YouTube algorithm. So yeah,
Help a pivot out of software engineering.
yeah, maybe next time.